Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Andy, and I do indeed intend to own a miniature pig. It's pretty much my life goal. His name's going to be Harrison, and he's going to be amazing. But until then, I'm working mostly on mobile stuff, and that's kind of what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So basically, I'm here to talk for about the next 30 minutes to give you kind of a bit of a injection of knowledge on sort of everything I know about mobile, everything I've learned working in mobile for the last 19 years. So just a little bit about my background. I started in the mobile industry back in 1999, working for a company called Nokia, who used to be quite big in that space. And yeah, I joined the games team there at Nokia. I just graduated computer science, and I was really into making games, and made a game called Space Impact for them back then, which was on the Nokia 3310, and worked on various mobile games for various mobile games companies for quite a while, like after that. Eventually, I kind of got a bit tired of making games, took a year off, went around the world, did some traveling, and ended up at business school after that, and then that kind of brought me to Berlin and to SoundCloud, where I spent the next 4.5 years leading various growth teams and efforts there. They basically brought me on to help them transition from being a web-first company to more mobile-first, and really to drive adoption of their mobile products. And that's kind of, during that time at SoundCloud, I was able to sort of fuse, I guess, a lot of what I'd learned making mobile games and working in the mobile industry with kind of what I'd learned at business school and what I was learning in this kind of fast-paced, sort of hyper-growth environment at SoundCloud. And this is where I published the Mobile Growth Stack, which is one of the frameworks that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So the last 2 years, I've been, about 2 years ago, I left SoundCloud, and with another former SoundClouder who was on the growth team, we set up a company called Phiture. We help apps to grow, so we help companies with mobile apps to build mobile growth strategy, and we can help them with some quite specific things around App Store optimization and retention-based services. And this is like some of the companies that we've worked with. So, yeah, I know a lot of you are sort of not coming from a sort of a native mobile background. Some probably are. Show of hands, like sort of who's kind of doing a lot with native apps. Okay, very few. I've got half a hand over here. So, okay, so I'm just going to basically give you like a quick introduction to sort of why native mobile apps are, particularly tough, and maybe some of the differences or specific things which are, kind of specific to the mobile app ecosystem. All right. So, any idea why I've got a chicken on the screen? No, no guesses. Okay, so this actually. It's from a lecture that I had from one of my economics professors when I was at business school. He was explaining a concept which is very prevalent in economics called perfect competition. And the metaphor, the example that he gave was egg farmers in the Philippines. He said, basically, in the Philippines, if you want to sell eggs, you just need a couple of chickens. You maybe keep them in a small cage or something like this. Very low barrier to entry. Lots of people doing it. Very undifferentiated product. Low barrier to exit as well. You can literally just throw away the cage, the chickens will run free, you're out of the business. And actually, like I was sitting there listening to this, it occurred to me that this is a lot like the App Store, actually. Because, much as you might think that these are sort of really like high-tech, super unique products, actually with the App Stores, you're essentially putting your product in a store with everybody else's product. You've got literally 2 stores in the whole country, or at least 2 significant stores. There are a couple of third parties, but the vast majority of distribution happens in 2 stores. So you've got the Apple Store and the Google Store, just not the actual physical stores. But so think about it in the context of a supermarket. If you're a seller, you're putting your product in an aisle that's 10 miles long with every other product in that category in that same aisle. It's discovery is a huge problem. Getting your product seen, within that kind of that huge amount of products, and then getting and conversion, of course, like getting somebody to actually sort of once they've even discovered your product to actually choose that one over all of the others there. And it's actually not that dissimilar to perfect competition and to the egg farming scenario in the Philippines, or actually egg market most places. Like you've got a approximately commoditized product. You've got a lot of competition. There's a lot of small players. It's essentially they're price takers in the market because there's, like for any kind of app that you can think about, more or less. There are a few exceptions where they've kind of been able to create really good like barriers and network effects, but most ideas for an app you could think of, you can check in the store. There's probably 6 or 7 apps doing something very similar. They're more or less kind of functionally identical, and they, at least a couple of them will be free. So it's a really tough competitive market, and it's really, it's a tough place to distribute your product. But even if you actually get your app, hang on, one more point on the app stores. Like one thing which really differentiates them from just kind of being discoverable on the web, for example, is these are curated stores. So somebody's actually managing these stores. It's Apple and it's Google, and they're doing editorial there. So they're actually sort of, if you know and you have good relationship with the store owner, you can maybe get preferential, placement, at least for a period of time. So think about these things at the end of the aisles here. There's these big displays. It's roughly akin to being sort of featured on the App Store and getting some sort of curation or sort of editorial featuring, which can definitely help with discovery. But let's just assume that your app did get discovered, it did get downloaded. Then you've got a scenario roughly like this. So this is basically a bunch of different retention curves for the sort of different performing apps in the store. Every curve looks pretty much the same. This is the Android store, but the iOS retention curves look more or less the same. What you're seeing here basically is a huge drop-off on day one. So between the first session and the next session, most people are never going to come back. Most people will use your app only once. And by the way, this starts at 100%, but actually around 10% of users will download your app and never even run it once. So it's actually a real challenge to even get onto this curve. And then, you've got a real challenge to actually get it to level off at a decent point where you've got a reasonable amount of users sticking around. So this is particularly scary if you think about driving paid traffic to your app, because the dynamics are really scary. It's a really tough funnel. And then you've got the complexity of the actual mobile ecosystem, actually the kind of technology that you might want to actually include in your app to give it certain advantages or certain capabilities. Like you're likely to want to incorporate a bunch of third-party technology. A lot of this is quite different to how it's done on web, or there's sort of specifics that are quite sort of technically detailed. There's a lot of difference between the two platforms, Android and iOS. So this is just an example of some of the third-party tools out there. This is put together by a company called mParticle, just to kind of illustrate the level of complexity just in the sort of development and release ecosystem to actually build an app which is functional and has all the capabilities that you need. So basically, it's a jungle, and it's a really tough place to kind of survive and to drive growth on mobile. And I wanted to just share with you basically with the second half of this presentation some of the things that I've learned and some of the tools that we use at Phiture and some of the things that we share with the rest of the industry. Because I do really feel like everybody's still trying to figure this stuff out. I mean, it's great to be in a room today with so many people who are kind of willing to share knowledge and best practice and their approach to conversion optimization, because I really do think that nobody's got everything figured out. We're all kind of figuring this out together, and so it's definitely my philosophy that it's really important to kind of share what you know, and that comes back to you in all sorts of ways. So. I'm going to start off with the mobile growth stack. This is something that I call the mobile growth stack. I don't expect you to capture all the detail there, and the slides will be available later, so don't worry too much about the detail. I'm just going to really explain the kind of purpose of the stack and give a couple of examples of how it's used in practice. And I'll kind of give you a bit of an outline of the structure. And if you want to read more about it, you can read about it at mobilegrowthstack.com, where I've kind of detailed all of these elements. But essentially, it's a one-page cheat sheet for mobile growth. It's kind of a reference that mobile marketers and mobile growth professionals can use to kind of look at the sort of the whole problem space and all of the kind of basic levers for mobile growth, the channels that are going to be effective, that may be useful in combination to build a mobile growth strategy. And the message is definitely not that you need to be doing all of these things in order to succeed on mobile. Nobody's doing all of these things well. And in fact, a good strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. So it's about focusing on the things which you can do well. So just a kind of a quick outline of like what the stack's about. So down here, we got three basic parts. This part here is kind of the foundational layer. So built on a layer of enabling technology. These are kind of the key building blocks of technology that you're likely to want to either build or buy in to enable activities in the rest of the stack. On the right-hand side here, we've got channels. I separated out channels from activities because I saw that even at places like SoundCloud, which is full of like fairly tech-savvy people, there was a poor understanding of the difference between doing, for example, lifecycle marketing, which is up here in the engagement and retention layer, versus push notifications, which are actually just a channel which you can do lifecycle marketing on. And so I felt it was important to kind of break those out because, as you know from like doing testing, it might be that the activity is actually fundamentally sound and could deliver results, but maybe you're testing with the wrong channel mix, for example. So channels down the right-hand side, foundation layer of tech, followed by foundation layer of analytics and insights. So like we're all fairly data-driven people here, I think. I figured it's really important to have good measurement in place in order to support some of the activities that you might do in the rest of the stack, which is broken down by three main layers: acquisition, engagement and retention, and monetization, representing kind of fairly universal business goals. And then there are a couple of what I call like catalysts, or like vertical columns here, which are kind of like multipliers. If you do these things well, there can be multipliers across acquisition, engagement and retention, and monetization. So that's the basic structure, and the reason that I kind of put that together, and I'll kind of briefly go through the kind of evolution of the stack, but when I joined SoundCloud, I saw that the situation was more or less like this, and certainly in my experience subsequently, I found that it's not unusual to have a situation like this in a company where, particularly in a hyper-growth company where things are kind of going off the scale, like, there's a lot of growth happening, but people are not necessarily understanding why, or how to control it or channel it or multiply it. There's usually a lot more questions than answers. There's usually a lot of people running around like headless chickens. I think one of the talks yesterday talked about like chasing the fire hose. That's often kind of the situation that we see. And it was really like that's kind of what I saw at SoundCloud when I joined. And I kind of put this together, which was my very first version of the mobile growth stack, which is just really my attempt to figure out how to do my job properly in terms of how to drive, how to organize my sort of thoughts and activities around driving growth on mobile. So this was, refreshingly simple compared to the latest version. I kind of hope to get it back to some level of simplicity, a bit more like this at some point. As you can see, there's a bit less detail in it, however. But yeah, this was just something I put around, I think, internally at SoundCloud, just to really kind of communicate my kind of picture of like how to do growth on mobile and what might be some of the key levers or things that we might want to focus on. And this was the first version that I published back in 2014. Published a blog post about it and presented it at a conference somewhere, a mobile conference. And it really blew up. It got really picked up widely. And what I realized from that was that actually this was useful not just to me, but actually to a lot of people working on mobile in other places and trying to grow mobile apps in other categories and in other situations. So it was really great to see that it was proving useful for people. So much useful, in fact, that Google actually approached us and asked us if they could adapt it and make a Googleified version, which they could present to Android developers at their developer conferences called Google Playtime. And so, yeah, they kind of removed anything that could be construed as an Apple reference and turned it into much more Google version. They put the business intelligence down the side rather than the bottom, but it's essentially the same framework, and it's a very nice validation of the concept. So, how do we use the mobile growth stack in practice? Like when we at Phiture, when we go into a new client and we sort of help them assess current situation, we do one of these, which is kind of what we call a mobile growth audit, or at least this is one of the outputs of our mobile growth audit, where essentially we look at we go through the stack, we look at everything that they're doing, everything that they're not doing, and for the things that they are doing, we try and sort of benchmark them according to where we think they could be performing. And that's a mixture of experience and also sort of publicly available and maybe private benchmarks that we have, really just to help them kind of understand, okay, what's performing well, in which case we'd give it a green. If it's kind of performing okay, but we think that there's significant upside, then it'd be a yellow. And if it's really underperforming, we'd color it red. And if we needed more information, we'd color it blue, but hopefully we'd we'd get that information before the end of the audit. And we'd gray out things which were not being worked on at that time. So in this case, for example, the whole monetization layer is gray, because we work with a lot of VC-funded startups where they're focusing first on user growth, and monetization comes later. So yeah, but if they're not doing certain things, yeah, we gray them out, and these are things which maybe in 6 months' time they actually start doing some of these things. So it might be part of the recommendation is to actually, to start doing some of these things which are gray. Might be actually to divest out of some of the things which are red, or to outsource them, because clearly the company's doesn't have the capability to do them well. So they either need to invest significantly or divest from these activities. The things that are yellow, maybe they want to invest to try and make them green. And the things that are green, they probably just want to keep doing them. And there's plenty of companies that use the mobile growth stack without our help as well. Like this is Graham Games. The CMO from Graham Games approached me at a conference a couple of years back and showed me this. He'd printed out a big version of the stack, and they were actually running their sprints on this. So Graham Games, they used to be based in Istanbul. They moved over to London, I think, a year or two ago, I think, to avoid some of the sort of political changes that were going on there. And then they recently just got purchased by Zynga for $300 million. So they're doing something right. So my second kind of survival tool for the jungle is this is something that we produced at Phiture along with another agency called Incipia. And yeah, it's another stack. Like we found that the mobile growth stack kind of went along so well that we basically took the same idea and tried to sort of apply this sort of on a micro level to like one of the specific areas, and it's something that we specialize in, App Store optimization. So App Store optimization, thinking back to that kind of store analogy and the huge superstore, yeah, it's really about sort of two things. It's increasing visibility within the store, and then it's increasing conversion. Once people have actually landed on your store page, making sure that store page is as high converting as possible. And when we talk about conversion, in the case of the App Store, it's getting someone to actually install the app and hopefully launch it at least once. So I'm not going to go through, again, in a ton of detail. We actually have another site for this, asostack.com. If you're interested in App Store optimization, we also actually have like a 400-page book that we published. We do sell it, but I've got some discount codes. So if you want a discount code for the ebook, come hit me up afterwards. Be happy to provide that. So that's the ASO stack. And kind of all of your traffic goes through the App Store. So regardless of whether it's paid traffic or you're looking for more organic discovery, or ideally both, I guess, one of the key differences with native mobile versus web is like you've got these kind of two distribution points, the App Store and the Google Play Store, and literally all of your traffic has to go through there. So it's really important to make sure that your App Store presence is as optimized as possible. And finally, something that's not a stack. So I want to talk a little bit about mobile CRM. I'm going to talk about CRM, customer relationship management, or marketing automation, bit more specifically in terms of a tactic. Just like to call out some of the couple of the key channels which are available on native mobile that are a bit different to some of the other kind of platforms that you might be familiar with. So one is push notifications. Probably everyone's pretty familiar and probably over-familiar with push notifications. You probably get a lot of them on your phone. Now, I think Pep, in his opening comments yesterday, also mentioned that push notifications are not performing as well as they used to be. And that's certainly true. That's true for any channel, right? Channels decay over time. They get saturated. Everyone piles in with a tactic. And suddenly these things which were working great, like, a couple of years ago, are not working so great anymore. That's just the nature of channels. I mean, it's definitely the case with email too, but email's still a valuable channel potentially if you can find out how to use it well. And I'd say definitely the case with push notifications. If I have like one tactical recommendation for anyone thinking about doing CRM on mobile, it's use in-app messages as well. Like these still perform great. These are definitely not saturated whatsoever. In fact, they're pretty poorly understood in the marketplace, and there's still a ton of upside. So this is a couple of examples of in-app messages. These are kind of modal pop-ups. You can do full interstitials. You can do slide-ups from the bottom. Essentially, an in-app message is just a segmented, targeted interaction with the user that kind of overlays on top of their kind of native app experience. And you can make them look super native as well. I have an example coming up for that. I do really recommend using a third-party solution for implementing your CRM to do your targeting, your segmentation, your testing, your measurement. I do see a lot of companies trying to build this stuff themselves, and I think you can really go down a deep rabbit hole trying to build decent CRM yourself. It's a big task. And usually what we see is companies manage to get the delivery part, because engineers kind of understand how to build stuff that sends push notifications or emails, but they're usually not so keen on all of the measurement and the testing and the front end and all the stuff that actually enables marketers and CRO people to actually improve things and measure and drive impact. So pretty much my only kind of practical example from today is from in-app messages. This is something that we did for Headspace. They have a meditation app. And this is something which I find is like sort of pretty good best practice. Like we found this working across the board. It's this idea of what I call intent-based onboarding. So capturing intent of the user in that very first session. If you think back to the retention curve, where we see, even in the top performing apps, there's still a huge drop-off of people like who never come back for their second session. So really, like, we hit them with something like this on their very first session. It looks very native, and we can reskin these, you know, to look completely native to the whatever app they're delivered into. But they can be delivered without having to build this stuff natively in the app and redeploy it to the store and go through a release cycle. This can all be delivered over the air using CRM. So what we do is, we ask the user, you know, what are you here for? It's like, it's not rocket science. Just try and get some intent from the user, try and understand what it is that they're there to do, and then customize their subsequent messaging, you know, personalize it, not even down to a personalized to a user level, but just customize it to, you know, even one of 3 different kind of segments of intent based on, you know, ideally some kind of user research or qual research up front to try and understand what would be those sort of 3 main things that the user is likely to want to do. And then provide them a different kind of CRM experience, different kind of messaging, different kind of information or help to get them onboarded and activated more successfully. And yeah, again, talking about the channels and the kind of things that, there's different channels available on mobile. They all have kind of slightly different dynamics. So we work with companies to really sort of help them understand, like, what is the right kind of channel mix, and what kind of channels should be tested or could be used in like what combination. So again, kind of, as I mentioned, like, broke out those channels separately in the mobile growth stack. I do think it's important to experiment with different channels, rather than just, you know, assume that you've got the right message in the right channel. You know, try doubling it up, try setting it on 2 channels, or, you know, try mixing it up a bit. And then finally, like the final kind of model that I want to leave you with, this is basically what I learned the hard way from building a notification service at SoundCloud. So I built a real-time notification system at SoundCloud that was kicking out a ton of push notifications and emails, like letting people know when there was sort of interesting stuff happening on the platform. And you know, we got it like running pretty quickly and got it driving a decent level of impact within sort of 3 to 4 months. So I think we did pretty well, like kind of going fairly iteratively with it. But what I did learn in that process and through the subsequent sort of 6 months of optimization was that it's really this formula. Like, you know, we spent a lot of time building the wrong notifications that really weren't delivering a huge amount of impact typically because the reach was too low. So like, I really kind of distilled it down to this formula after a while, which is like, you know, the impact that you can drive from like engagement or retention is typically like driven by these 3 inputs: reach, relevance, and frequency. And of those, I would really recommend optimizing for reach, first of all, when you're building notifications, because it's easier to optimize relevance later through additional personalization. But there's sort of a natural tension between these 3 variables, right? So if you think about a direct message that you receive on WhatsApp, the relevance is crazy high because someone has actually sent you a direct message, right? It's targeted to you, it's personal, it's got everything to basically, the relevance is like 100%. But the reach is super low, you know, it's like 1-to-1. So you need to send a lot of those, thinking about that from a growth perspective to actually drive any like meaningful impact on the platform. Versus, for example, an Instagram celebrity posting a selfie, or in the case of SoundCloud, it would be Drake, for example. He was like probably one of the most popular artists on the platform. When he would release a new track, we could send 10 million people a push notification right away. So the reach was really high. So the potential for impact was there. And then, as I said, relevance is usually something that you can improve through improved personalization. Anything you can do to kind of leverage what you know about the user, their past behavior, their demographics, anything that you know about the user that you can use to improve that personalization and make it appear like it's a personalized message just for them, super segmented. Even if actually you're sending it to 10 million other users, that's where you can really kind of drive up that relevance, which you can kind of approximate with a click rate, basically. It's a good proxy for relevance. And if you can improve that relevance to a decent extent, then users will tolerate those messages at a higher frequency without opting out or even abandoning the product. Because if the relevance is high enough, people will accept a lot of notifications, and they'll be quite happy to receive them because they're relevant. So that's actually it for the kind of 3 kind of tools for surviving that mobile jungle that I want to communicate to you. Some resources there: Mobile Growth Stack, ASO Stack, and Bitly link to the RRF framework. And I think we hopefully have time for some questions. Thanks.